Okay, so this is we're going to look at the Schoolboy in this this video, and it's another poem that is in Songs of Innocence, and we have to question why. It was originally included in Innocence, and it was moved to Songs of Experience when the collection was published. The anthology puts it back into Innocence, and I question that because the poem is a very critical one. The poem is one that's actually very close to my heart. It's one of the few poems I've quoted in relation to my chosen profession, and I suppose for me it highlights the difference between the utopia and the reality of teaching. That is the difference between what we'd like to do and how we have to do it. So you will probably hear my sighs of lament as I guide you through this poem. In this poem, Blake is critical of the formal education system and presents his view through the child narrator. The rhyme scheme throughout is a regular A, B, A, B, B, and a regularity might be said to echo the regularity, perhaps, I don't know, echoes the regularity in a child's life, maybe even the despair in a child's life due to the way he's educated. Now the poem starts with this lovely pastoral stanza that suggests happiness and freedom. We see that the child loves to rise, suggests an eagerness, and the birds are used throughout in this poem as a metaphor. Birds represent freedom, the freedom that we can't attain simply because birds have more freedom than us. They can fly anywhere, they can go anywhere, up, down, left, right, whereas we are constrained. We can only walk on the one plane. And there is unbridled joy in this opening stanza. And note that the bird, the skylark, joins in with the child who is singing. Again, singing is a sign of happiness, and the bird joins in, illustrating the harmony between the child and nature. So that link that in its purest, the child, because the child is aligned with nature, it represents innocence within its purest state. However, as we go on to the second stanza, the connective but shows that the joy is short-lived as the child goes to school and is critical of the teacher. The teacher is called the cruel eye. Okay, it's almost seen as like a prison guard. And the previous pastoral stanza serves to show contrast. Here we have little ones sighing and dismay. Their joy's been removed, and they are constrained and restrained within the adult world. There is no joy. Notice how the child in the third stanza wants to sit in learning's bower but is not allowed. Okay, a bower is just a shady place under a tree, so there is a sense that the child wants to reconnect with nature, but that freedom is not allowed. The child has to sit in the classroom. Notice in this next stanza here, and this is one of my favourite lines in Blake poetry, is how can the bird that is born for joy sit in a cage and sing? That metaphor suggesting that adults restrain and confine children, and the removal of this innocence is removing a child's natural instincts. The joy of innocence, the imagination is being removed. Blake really here is reflecting upon the philosophical ideas about children. Think about the philosophers at the time. We had in the 17th century, John Locke said that children were empty slates waiting to be filled with knowledge. He believed that children best learn through nurture and play. In a sense, what education did, and what some would still argue does, is it fills children with knowledge. I mean, that's what I'm doing now. I'm just giving you knowledge, filling you with, you're not children, you're young adults, but I'm just filling you with knowledge. And that's what we do at school. We fill you with knowledge, not through play, as Locke suggested was best. What we do is we restrict, and that's what the metaphor suggests. Okay, that whole idea that you are, or that children are, that they're not. They need that lack of restriction. They need that nurturing. And what do? We take that away from them. Okay, they're like birds that we put into a cage. How can they enjoy life if we restrain them? Okay, so what we do is we take away their natural curiosity, we remove the child's happiness. So we take the child from a state of joyful innocence to an experience where they lament the loss of their youthful spring. The child laments the loss of childhood itself. This links to, I know we've talked about this guy before, Rousseau. Rousseau was an 18th century philosopher, and this links to his ideas. He thought that children were, he called them noble savages. This is the idea that children are born good but society can make them bad. Rousseau felt that adults should pay attention to children's needs during different stages of development. You know, and maybe that's we've got those elements within education today, perhaps. Blake's belief was that the education system confined these children. So what it did, taking Rousseau's ideas, you had people who were born good, people who were born innocent, but they were turned bad. That's not to say they became criminals, but the confines forced them to lose that childhood innocence. It meant that they would lose their imagination, for example. Blake himself promoted learning outside the classroom. You know, if we link back to the idea about the child wanting to sit in learning's bower, and that's because Blake felt that to be spontaneous and to have natural creativity, it flourishes when you are allowed to learn in an environment that you enjoy. But he felt that and when I say an environment that you enjoy, maybe a natural environment, something that reconnects us back with nature. But the formal education setting removes that. If we look at these final two stanzas here, the child laments at what the formalised education is, and that's to give instructions. He's telling his parents what formal education is doing to children, and there are two really important images here. First, we have the metaphor of the plant. It's not allowed to flourish because its buds are cut back, so it can't bear fruit. Metaphorically illustrating what can happen to the child, Blake uses the natural imagery as an image of pastoral innocence that adults restrict, thus removing the child's ability to be fruitful. And the child's ability to be fruitful is the child's ability to be creative and imaginative. So that's removed by metaphorically nipping the bud, nipping the child. Furthermore, the child talks about the passing of time. What we've got the move from spring to summer and rapidly on to winter. So notice how the removal of innocence, the child is talking about the removal of his innocence, and what it does is it accelerates a child quickly through their life from spring to winter, suggesting perhaps a life without imagination and creativity. It slips away very, very quickly. Okay, when you have a life without creativity is in a sense it's not worth living. Okay, you go from birth to death quite quickly if you have a life without imagination. So overall, Blake he's protesting the establishment, and in this case the state, and he's protesting against the state because what they've done through formalised and restrictive education is they've constrained, they've confined, they've removed the imagination of the child. They've moved imaginative and creative thought. What they're doing is they're stunting rather than nurturing. They're not doing what John Locke said or what Rousseau suggests. Is that they're kind of stopping, in a sense, they're stopping learning. It's making education dull for the child. And I think perhaps, you know, if we're looking at the perceptive ideas, is why is the state doing this? And just think, maybe a restrictive state doesn't want people who are creative and independent. People who are independent and creative might think critically and therefore oppose the views of the state, you know, question the views of the state, and people who question the views of the state are people who potentially overrun the state. Remember, these poems were written in lieu of the French Revolution. And the state and our state, our government, our monarchy feared that people that people were really going to do as the French did and to overrun us. People who think critically might oppose the views of the state. Therefore, is it that the state is constraining education in such a way as stopping people from being imaginative and creative? Therefore, overall, is it that Blake is protesting against freedom?